Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. Welcome back, episode 299 of the Freight 360 podcast. Ben, we're almost at 300. We'll do that one next week.
Yeah.
But if you're brand new, you got 298 other episodes, plus all the Q&A sessions. And as a caveat, I'm pretty sure the first 20 or 30 episodes are not publicly available just because I recorded them under a slightly different brand and company. But anyway, for all intents and purposes, episode 299. Share us with your friends. Check out the website, freight360.net, and check out the Freight Broker Basics course if you're looking for some educational options. So, do you ever have anybody ask you about that, Ben? That we're like, where's the first 30 episodes? Is when I worked at LDI, and their name was part of the branding of it very early on, and it was produced by them. So,
I remember.
Yeah, I just kind of got rid of those. And I'll be honest, all the content that was in them is definitely regurgitated and improved upon in our other content, so you're not missing anything. Yeah, what's going on in Florida, man?
Nice to have you back, brother.
Yeah, a couple weeks of Army stuff, but we're back.
It is now very hot. I mean, and it's funny. I was talking to my cousin about this, just working out, exercise, sports and stuff, and it's I measure a lot of this stuff, either with a Fitbit or whatever, just all different types of things. And I've been playing tennis now since October. And up until May, I was able to get my cardio up to I could play for 2 hours, pretty solid without being super winded. When I first started, did 15 minutes in, I felt like I was going through hell week in high school, sports, wanted to throw up, couldn't breathe. And it's so crazy because as soon as it started to get hot, and also the humidity, which also makes it way harder to breathe.
Yeah.
I am so tired after an hour that I just stopped. I just moved my lesson from Saturday morning to one of the nights during the week because I'm my whole day's shot. I am so tired after playing out in that heat for an hour, hour and a half that I don't even want to eat for 4 hours. I can't get anything done around the house. And I'm just I'm either getting really old or it is really hot or maybe a little both.
I used to love playing. I was in a nighttime volleyball league on Thursdays. And I used to love the nighttime, summer.
Great.
Yeah, it cools off a little bit. Big heat wave coming across most of the U.S. in the coming week, so it's going to be hot. It was actually interesting. So, talking about fitness, I have a slight. Did I give you an update on my knee?
How's your leg?
Yeah,
no,
so
you didn't. I know.
I tore my meniscus almost a month ago, but it's a minor tear. So, I went to the orthopedics office, and they're they did an X-ray, which they knew nothing was going to show up, but it's all you got to do everything in order. And they basically said based on mobility tests and things like that, it's probably a slight tear. Self PT is going to be the answer for it. No need for an MRI or any surgery or anything like that. So I actually just this week, yesterday or Monday, got on the treadmill, which is where I tore it. It was on the treadmill. So I got back on the treadmill for the first time in almost a month to do just some walk and jog intervals. And it's crazy what a month of not regularly running will do to your cardio levels or your fitness levels. And I was is it just my injury or not working out, or am I just getting old? And I was or is it all of the above?
All three. Dude, I'll have to send you this later. Remind me, because I pulled a tendon in my elbow. It was similar to a tennis elbow injury, but this was working out 2 years ago. This thing took 11 months to heal. And I have tendonitis in my shoulder, and I went through the MRI and stuff just to make sure I wasn't going to damage something. And same scenario, self PT. I went to a physical therapist once. They give me a list of exercise. I do them every morning. But I found this guy who was on a Tim Ferriss episode where they interview him, and this is a Stanford, I can't remember, physiologist. He's a PhD, right? And studies whatever, biomechanics. But he only studies how to heal tendons and things like that, meniscuses injuries, and like the whole interview is awesome because he explains like, especially as you get older, most people do big muscle groups but don't really strengthen like very small muscles that are all necessary to do anything.
Yeah.
Those go first. And like one fixing it, like I was able to improve both my elbow and my shoulder in like 3 weeks doing like what he said. And it was basically like you just hold tension on it for 30 to 45 seconds. You do that like a couple times every morning. And there's like at that amount of time, your body basically sends everything it needs to it to help repair it, but it doesn't stress it to the point where it injures the injured part. Like it strengthens the rest of it. And then there's a peptide I ordered that I take with it. You take that and vitamin C, you put it in like like a drink. It almost tastes like nothing, but it's specifically the thing that your body needs to repair tendons, which is different than protein for your muscles. And taking that every morning, doing those for like 5-10 minutes helped so much. And like I went to physical therapist for like 9 months and it didn't help.
You remember in when we were in Florida, I was showing you, I'm pouring my hydro water right now. My little.
I got the tabs. I didn't get the bottle yet, but I bought the tabs.
About it, I was like, I got my hydro water here. It helps with inflammation. Anyway, yeah. So with a knee injury, and I was gone the last like 2.5-3 weeks for Army National Guard. We were up at Fort Drum, and the timing couldn't have been worse because like. We're out in the field and it's uneven terrain, like austere environment for the most part. And my paperwork hadn't gone through yet to like officially limit what I could and couldn't do in an Army setting. So I'm like wearing combat boots, walking in the woods, and dude, the limping, like it was bad. I literally took what was just an injury to my right side of my right knee. And next thing you know, from the limping and like the counter act, like how I would basically like adjust my movement and limp, like then the left side of my knee started hurting, then my left knee started hurting, then my lower back started hurting, and I was like, finally, like getting home and sleeping in a normal bed, like definitely has helped out with just feeling better. But
they're all connected.
Yeah,
like
we're gonna have a good to tie this all in. We're gonna have a good discussion today about military freight, because I had a pretty interesting thing that I was dealing with as well while I was gone, which we'll kind of tie that in today's episode. Other stuff, Florida, dude. The Florida Panthers just won the Stanley Cup this week, so South Florida, I'm sure is happy. I'm sure there's a lot of NHL fans that aren't happy. They're sick of Florida dominating, but it is what it is. I think NBA is coming up on the.
Did you watch the end of the Open? Did you get to watch any of it?
So it was on Father's Day, right? So my brothers had it on inside my house. I was hosting, so I was pretty busy, but I checked out a little bit of it. I had it on. I was just shocked at like the scores. Dude, like these guys
One guy under par.
I think the winner was like 1 under.
One guy under par. Finished.
Yeah, and it was it in Pittsburgh, awesome. Right?
Yeah, it was Oakmont. That was like one of the coolest things was like I got to play that course, and like I have friends that kind of play. My cousin gets to play it pretty often, is good friends with, I think his name's Devin G. He's the pro up there. Darren, you were out. My cousin won the Tri-State Open too as an amateur like 2 weeks ago. He was going to walk with, I think it was Terrell Hatley. One of the pros wanted somebody local to walk the course during the practice round, and my cousin didn't end up being able to go because he had to work. But it was pretty cool watching a huge tournament and being familiar with the course and like having been able to walk it, play it. And it was really pretty interesting. A big comment was like, what would a 18 handicapped or 10 handicapped player shoot under those conditions, right? And Bryson said, he's like, I wouldn't be surprised if an 18 handicap shot a 200 there, right? And that level of rough.
I'm like a 20 handicap. Like a bogey golf is good for me. And that's when I was like, yeah, I'd probably, my brother was joking. He's like, yeah, the one guy missed the cut and was at like, shot like some wild score, like high. And I was like, yeah, it's the kind of guy I could golf with. He's like, no, he's like, literally like, you'd probably be like 3 times that. So.
Yeah. I mean, somebody asked me, they were like, well, what did you shoot when you played there? And first off, like it wasn't US Open conditions when I played there. Like the rough wasn't that high. Second of all, like there is a saying or a piece of advice my cousin gave me when I first played there. And I think I was an 8 handicap when I played there. That was when I was playing like every day. And I think I broke 100. I think I shot a 99 or 100. I have the card around here. But like there's a big asterisk next to that because the saying was, and he told me this before I went because I was like nervous to play this course. He's like, the saying is like, play fast. And if you're playing poorly, play faster, right? Because there's a caddy and you're playing with other people. And I was playing with like, I think they matched me. It was the senior legal counsel for Callaway Golf. This guy played with VJ Singh like the day before, and like this other CEO of a company that were like really good. So like I shot a 99 or 100, but I definitely didn't play every ball all the way to the hole because like you hit a shot and sometimes you're at an 8 or a 9 and like you're just going to pick your ball up to go to the next hole to not hold the group up. So like I definitely probably would have shot playing like true golf rules, probably like 115, 120 as like a 7 handicapper.
I did one of the Pinehurst courses a few years ago. I shot like a 98 at. I'm
Still
going
have
next
that towel
week
you
too.
got me.
I'm going to Kiowa next week for a buddy of mine's getting married and he wants to do a golf trip. So we're going down to Charleston and what is it, like the ocean course there that the PGA has a event at every few years. So that'll be a good one. But yeah, anyway.
But really cool to see JJ Spawn win. I mean, like he's definitely like an everyday golfer. And there was a post I saw that like, and I think he has 2 daughters, and he's like, yeah, he was at CVS at 3:00 in the morning on Sunday because his daughter was throwing up, and then came back and then like won the Open. They were like, absolutely great Father's Day, kind of like.
So news here. There's 2 things I wanted to highlight. One of them, and this came out in our newsletter on Tuesday. So if you guys aren't subscribed, make sure you go to the website freight360.net. There's a box to put your email address in. You'll get our news update every Tuesday and then our news and market update every Thursday. Just some quick highlights from various sources around the freight community. But the one that I found interesting was there was an article from, who did this? This was G Captain, which they do a lot with like maritime trends and whatnot. But they looked at the amount of empty containers and where they're moving and what that could indicate for freight. So I'll try and read a little snippet here. Basically, let's see. So after optimism spiked following the U.S.-China talks in Geneva, many in the industry anticipated a surge in peak season imports, but the data tells a different story. One of the most telling signs is a steep decline in empty container exports out of major U.S. ports like LA and Long Beach. When there's demand, empty containers are hustled back to Asia for refilling. That rush simply isn't happening. So that's kind of the long and short of it. But basically what they're saying is, we think because there's this pause in tariffs and we don't know what's going to happen that, stuff's going to boom. But the reality is like the containers aren't moving there because the
demand's not there.
Just truly isn't there. So you've seen the headlines. Freight fraud isn't going anywhere. But if you're a QuickScope customer, you're not seeing it in your business. QuickScope is a cutting-edge, load-level visibility tool that stops fraud before it starts, right where it happens. Inside the transaction, no noise, just results. With unlimited usage and by far the most cost-effective product on the market, QuickScope delivers real value without the bloated price tag or platform confusion. And here's the kicker. Version 2 of QuickScope drops this summer, packed with powerful new features and AI integrations that'll make your visibility game even stronger. Sign up today and you'll be locked in at today's pricing when version 2 goes live. Stop chasing fraud. Start stopping it. Visit quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE and learn more. Yeah.
2 things on the back of that. Ryan Peterson, CEO of Flexport, has done a lot of really good content on what's happening. And he said this probably like a month ago, is exactly that. Like most of what ships from the US to China is air, is the joke, because they're empty containers that get refilled to come back in. That was already not happening. And he said the shipping lines were already sailing blank, meaning empty ships, because the demand wasn't there. They were rerouting ships to other countries. So he had said back then that even if there is a pause, there's going to be a giant time lag for the shipping lines to either get empty containers where they're needed and to get the ships there, which takes time. He's like, so that's already going to be a whiplash. Even if the demand comes back, you're going to see something like that. And he said the other thing was not only that, but like trade was already being rerouted. And now even when you saw some of the increases, like the rates went way up. They jumped like 50% as soon as there was a pause, because it costs more money to get the empties over there. So even though there's the pause in tariffs, there's also an increase in the cost to now ship a container, which people are going to pay in inflation, right?
Yep.
And then there was something in Freight Caviar this morning that said Gene Soroka, I think, is like the head of the unions over at the ports over on the West Coast. And he's like, imports and exports are down like 9 and 5 or 6%. You're starting to see carriers really starting to feel the pain because there's just not as much cargo to be moving out of there right now. And everybody is seeing the impact in our industry one way or another.
Yep.
Anything. So,
yeah, interesting.
Not super positive.
Yeah. The other one, which is somewhat timely, because we just recently had an episode with DAT where we talked about the Outgo acquisition. I wish we had Ken like readily available to like bring him on here and get his take, but like
it was settled yesterday.
It was?
Yeah, this morning there was in Freight Caviar, there was an emergency hearing yesterday. And
I know it was yesterday, yeah. But I didn't even know this was like a thing. And I thought about it too. At first I was like, didn't they used to have like an OTR relationship or like a referral thing? But OTR was basically trying to file suit saying that like you're violating a non-compete, that like a non-competition that we had from our rev share program in the past. So what was the outcome then?
An emergency hearing in the OTR DAT lawsuit took place yesterday, June 17th, following a court order temporarily halting DAT's Outgo platform over a non-compete dispute. According to legal commentator Matt Leffler, the case has now been settled. DAT confirmed that Outgo remains live with loads marked by a black $sign, indicating broker eligibility. DAT says it remains focused on minimizing disruptions and scaling its carrier payment.
It was like
tech.
A blue check mark is what they were saying.
Yes.
Because that was like the OTR thing was the blue check mark. And isn't that what Outgo originally had, was a blue check mark? So they changed it to a black $sign?
Yeah, like it was that basically, I think when Outgo, if you were as a carrier looking at a broker, or I think a broker looking at a carrier, I can't remember which one, it showed you the creditworthiness with the same indication that was under the OTR relationship. So they were arguing that that was part of it. And then they argued something about the non-compete. And I didn't get into the legal details of it, but it's
interesting.
Done.
Well, I'm glad that's taken care of. So let's get into it today. So we're going to talk some general information about government freight, DoD, SDDC. What does it all mean? What does it all stand for? We'll dig into that. And what's interesting is I have never personally moved DoD freight on the freight brokerage side. My company, we have brokers that do it, so I'm familiar with the process. But I have worked on the military side of it once historically for a deployment, and I'm working on it again right now, which we can kind of dig into. And you have worked on the DoD side with Crowley business, I believe, and some other things. So you're well versed
Crowley
in it.
XPO through TQL. I ran it and managed Bruce, who was on our show years ago. He ran the Mississippi to, I think he had the East Coast. Yeah, and I had the West Coast. We split the country in half. So my team ran anything military on the West side. And at first, XPO had the contract. Then Crowley took the contract. So I managed it directly with the SDDC and also through both Crowley and XPO when they manage all of it, like the entire contract.
Yep. So I want to start off just kind of basic, like define what some of these things are, right? So when we say DoD, we're talking Department of Defense. All right. Now, the SDDC, which people will often hear, that's the Surface Distribution and Deployment Command. That is when you look at the United States military, you have United States Transportation Command, which is like the overarching transportation organization that handles all stuff moving, air, ocean, and on the ground, okay? The Air Force has Air Mobility Command. That's what flies things around. The Navy has a Military Sea Lift Command, which moves things on boats. And where we come in domestically as freight brokers and have opportunities is with the ground side of things, the SDDC, the Surface Distribution Deployment Command. It's the Army's leg of that. And go ahead.
It's not just the Army. At the very least, I don't think, because we used to work a lot with...
It's not just the Army, but it's primarily the Army. But it's all the ground things. So
so we did a lot with Marine bases. I remember like 29 Palms and things. So we did like the troop movements and things for mostly the Marines and the Army when they would either move for deployments or move to like rearrange things from one base to another. Like
so not training, to totally nerd out
as
a military logistician, not to totally nerd out, but SDDC is an Army component. All right, the same way that Air Mobility Command is an Air Force component, but they don't move only their own services stuff. They're just the one responsible for it. So like Air Mobility Command for the Air Force will move Army assets, will move Navy assets, etc. Military Sea Lift Command has the ships. They will move, a Marine Corps unit or an Army unit overseas, right? They'll move their equipment. The same way that SDDC for the Army will move Army equipment on the ground, they'll move Navy equipment on the ground, they'll move Marine equipment on the ground. It's just that the Department of Defense assigns each of those three to a specific organization to take command and control of it. So when we say SDDC and we say it's an Army component, it does not mean it's just moving Army equipment.
It just means it sits under that branch.
Yep. It's considered an Army Service Component Command. So Army owns and manages it, but the customer is all the Department of Defense assets. So that when you hear SDDC, that is oftentimes who the actual customer is. Like if you look at who you're invoicing and who you're billing, it's SDDC because that's who's actually.
Too, I think.
What's that?
SDDC is the organization you're working with, and if I remember, the billing goes through CAS. At least it used to.
Syncada.
Oh, Syncada. Yeah, that's right.
Yep. So yeah, like we won't get into the super fine-tuned details, but like you have to have a U.S. bank account. Syncada is like how payments are processed and whatnot. But basically, we'll talk about the big picture of how this stuff all works. Okay.
Well, I do want to put one little point out there, right? Because we've gotten plenty of questions over the years. Like, I want to get set up. How does this look? Where do I go through? Right? Like, you really do want to understand how these things work because there's a lot of admin work for each of these loads, and there's not often as much profit, but there's a ton of volume, right? So there's different things you want to kind of understand if you're going to start moving this type of freight. Honestly, like I would spend the time to at least do some high level research to understand how and what organizations you need to do, what hoops you need to jump through to get onboarded. Like, I remember when we did this, like, we literally whiteboarded it out to see exactly what we're explaining. Like, okay, this organization is for this part of the military. They move things for these. This one does this. So we could literally visualize it and kind of see it so you could understand who you're working with, what you're moving, where, and the invoicing parts of it, and each step you need to take to get involved in actually participating in these bids and things. So through it though, like you kind of don't have to keep doing it. It's really like a one and done thing, but really understanding that like the admin requirement was not small. Like for the volume of freight we moved, we had way more staff doing invoicing and billing than probably almost any other account, probably a TQL. Because the steps to make sure you get paid, if they're not done right, you just don't get paid. It's not like you just call somebody and they're like, oh yeah, let me process this for you. Like it's got to go through every one of the bureaucratic steps to make sure you get paid for the work you do.
Did you ever work with GFM? That's like the TMS, global freight management. So like,
yes,
that's another piece of it too.
Portal,
when you start to hear this stuff, if you go through the process of setting your company up, whether it's an asset-based company or a 3PL to bid on and move military freight, you're going to see these terms brought up. So GFM is the system where the bidding and everything happens.
Yep.
Syncada, which I believe the parent organization is US Bank Corps. That's the payment processing system. And then SDDC is the actual organization in which these awards are given and the tenders come
three,
from.
Right? If you want to outline it, because I remember like we had 2 people staff just doing Syncada and billing. We had 1 person that just sat in that TMS all day as bids came up to put in numbers to submit them to get awarded freight. And then there was another bid system that was sent out, at least it was by like Excel sheets. That was through the SDDC. They would send out like 1 or 2 a day sometimes 7. Anywhere from like 5 to 20 bids would go out every day or during a week. And then it had what was the movement, what was the truck codes that they were requesting, and then what the volume was, what the time frame was. And then you would put in your number for each one of them, submit it. And then usually the top 5 to 7 brokers and carriers would get chosen. And like they were anywhere from like, hey, we got a 20 truck movement or a 5 truck movement up to 150 or 200 truck movements, 250. But also like, I remember one of the longest bids that was the smallest number was like, I worked on moving a rocket engine from like the base in like Utah that had to go to California, then over to Cape Canaveral. And this thing was like, I remember it was like 80 or 90,000 pounds. It had to go on like a 13 axle trailer. It was the most expensive move I've ever looked at. Like, I think the bid on that was something like
Oh
$75,000.
yeah. You think between like insurance and specialized equipment. So let's start with like, yeah, what are some of the reasons that, what are the use cases if we consider the military as the customer here? Why are they moving things? What are these scenarios? So you just, you gave an example of one, which is, hey, we need to move something unique from one place to another for some specific reason, right? That's one. And those are kind of one-offs. Then you have if a unit is mobilizing or deploying and they didn't move all their stuff from their base maybe to a port where it's going to go on a ship. Okay, so you got to do all that ground transport to get it from whatever fort or camp it's at to wherever it's going to load out of, right? And that's going to be a big project a lot of times with a lot of different equipment involved there. Another example, it's one that I'm dealing on right now, is what's that?
So I remember it was like equipment, stuff, and then you also had like rolling stock, like a bunch of RGNs because you're loading trucks onto that, like
Yep.
military trucks
So
onto it to get on a boat or off of it. That's the
example I want to talk through today. Base to base move is another one, right? Where we're moving equipment from one base to another base. And this could happen for a variety of reasons. It could be that, hey, this unit is going to a big culminating training exercise, and it's at a place like the National Training Center out in 29 Palms or somewhere in, no, it's in California.
Most of them, for some reason, the trainings, if I remember, I remember doing a lot with the base in South Carolina going to 29 Palms. And those were
29
big
Palms
moves.
is a Marine Corps base, but the National Training Center at Camp, I think it's Camp Irvine or Irving, or I should know this in the Army. Let's see, where's NTC? In freight, time is money, and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
Camp Irwin, California. And then you've got Fort Polk in Louisiana is another big training area for the Army. You've got a bunch of them, right? But this is, again, you're going to move a whole unit out from one base to another, and then on the back end, you're going to move them back, okay?
Other bucket.
Yeah,
another one that we used to do a lot of support with was the base that's up by San Francisco. They support the wildfires and the firemen that go out and huge forest fires. When there were fires, a ton that year, I remember, all the equipment that went out there came from that military base. So we would get spot loads where, we'd actually talk to them. They would call us and be like, hey, we got to get 8 trucks up there in the next hour and a half. We did a lot of that supporting the wildfires during that year when they were really prevalent off that base.
Yep. So the one that I'm dealing with right now is it's a base-to-base move. So we've got in New York State in the National Guard, we've got a logistics unit that's in Western New York, south of Buffalo, and they're getting restationed. So it's not temporary; it's a permanent move. So all their stuff, everything from trucks to generators and you name it, is all going to New York City permanently. It's going to be their new home, their new station. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how we're going to move all this stuff from one side of the state, literally all the way across the other side of the state. And so we'll kind of unpack that a little bit here. But you go back about a dozen years ago, the last time I dealt with one of these was for a mobilization or deployment. So actually, that same unit that's repositioning now, I used to be a part of, and when we deployed the last time, we had to get all of our stuff down to Texas, where we trained up for 2 months before going overseas. So I was the unit movement guy. So I actually legitimately was there when flatbed drivers rolled up and we're loading our containers and our equipment up on flatbeds, and I'm driving it down there. But it's interesting the way it works. National Guard and active duty military are a little bit different, but there's a head officer that's a TO that you're probably familiar with, the transportation officer for the base and the active duty. And in the National Guard, it's a state transportation officer. So they handle not just a base, but all the units within the state. So that's the actual person who you're likely going to have a relationship with, who will tender, or they might be requesting information or quotes from you, or tendering things out to you, or getting you approved on their end. There's all kinds of ways this can happen.
Here's something really important about this, right? People think, and this is applicable in any freight you move, and this is why I probably say this more than any other piece of advice in our industry, is you need to speak with the people you're doing business with, and you need to have a relationship. It changes, one, the amount of business you'll get, the likelihood you'll get the business, knowing what's going on beyond just the details that get emailed to you, because like in the instance of TOs, right, quickly, is, okay, so we get an Excel sheet with bids. They're very similar to any bid you're going to do for any company, except they're going to happen all together over one period of time. And here's why that matters. If you are moving, say, 10 or 15 flatbeds a day for 10 days, right? There's only so many flatbeds within 50 or 150 miles of a base. So when you've got to move 15 to 20 a day, you almost always suck up all of the available spot capacity before you hit the number that's needed. So then you've got to go to surrounding areas and pay to deadhead trucks to come in and load to then move, because there's usually just not that many available for that period of time, right? So what happens in a practical standpoint when you're moving this is, okay, say the average rate on that lane is just like, I don't know, $3,500. Your first one or two trucks, you might pay 34 to 36 because a guy needs to go there. He'll take it a little less. Somebody kind of doesn't want to, you pay a little more. When you get to like your fourth or fifth truck you book that day, like you are always paying way above the average because they're usually not as close and you got to pay to deadhead them. That's the first thing you got to understand when you're bidding these. The second thing you got to understand is there are multiple brokers always working on these movements. So if you got, say there's 15 loads a day and you get allocated 5, I get allocated 5, and 2 other brokers each get allocated 5. If I bid, say 3,700 on that lane because I feel like I'm going to pay 35, but you bid 4,000 and you expect to pay 38, you're fourth on that list. So I get the first 5 because I am the cheapest guy. If you are number 4 on that list, you bid more money. So you have more money to pay carriers. So what happens is when everybody posts their loads on DAT example for that day, I need to cover mine for the average, call it 3,500. You want to get your trucks booked up before they're all gone. So you start offering every truck 38. Because you got $4,000 into it. So what happens is you buy all the capacity for the higher rate and I don't get any covered. And this is an instance where like you really end up competing with each other to get the same trucks to go run the same freight, which pushes all the rates up. This is important because you need to understand the relationship of how you're bidding these. Your rates versus volume on a given day change. It's not the same thing as booking 1 or 2 trucks. You end up paying different money because there's more need, right? Higher demand pushes prices up. Well, the same thing happens with shippers. This is why shippers don't want to give a whole bunch of the same loads to 4 or 5 brokers, because if everybody starts posting the same loads sometimes, all it does is inflate the cost the shipper pays.
Yep.
And the trucks win. And this is one of these scenarios where carriers always complain that brokers drive rates down, but in a lot of cases, a lot of brokers competing for the same truck actually benefits carriers, and it pushes their rates up because the carriers are able to play the brokers against each other for a better rate.
So that's a really, really good point. And this is applicable not just to military freight. So, and that goes right to the example that I'm talking through here. So the scenario that we've got is this is a logistics unit. So they have a lot of big trucks, big equipment, and they have some smaller things as well. but this unit is actually designed by its structure to be able to move, to self-move the unit wherever it has to go. So it has the trucks and it has the flatbeds and it has the van trailers to be able to move stuff. So the question is, does this unit self-move all of its stuff? And the reality is you're taking young, somewhat inexperienced drivers and ask them to drive a very, very large military truck into New York City. Not a good idea, right? So that's where we look at, okay, why don't we have the experts that do this every single day and not some 20-year-old National Guard soldier who's, driven it for 3 hours, right? Why don't we hire the professionals to move the more intricate stuff? But now we're looking at what you just said. If we've got, let's say, 30 trucks that got to move, right? And we've got to load them on specialized lowboys or RGNs, or in some cases, it's Humvees going on flatbeds. You're going to suck that capacity up quick, which will drive your prices up. So the consideration we had is, well, what is important here? Is it about getting it done realistically with a cost estimate that makes sense, or does it have to get there by a certain time? And which we always talk about, right, in freight in general, is like,
it's not black or white either. It's not binary, meaning like we're all price or we're all service. The reality is most shippers have to weigh both of these and come up with some gray area in the middle where service is important to a point. And then it's like, okay, we're going to give up a little bit of service to save a little bit of money, because most companies, even the military, doesn't have an unlimited budget to just go. And in certain scenarios, that budget goes out the window and service matters. Yeah, everybody thinks that. But it's like, there are very few scenarios where budget goes completely out the window and it's all service. That's usually when things can't move. COVID and things, right? Very extreme. But almost every shipper is weighing the same thing you're talking about. Like, we need to get all these moved by this deadline. So like, we have a hard stop to get them there. But how do we do this without going unlimited budget and giving up all of our service by trying to be too cheap? Like, how do you really gauge that line? This is how you work back with your shippers, by the way, as a broker, to get them to understand it's not black or white. And if somebody's just like, I'm all cheap and I want all service, like I always laugh because it's like they're digging their own grave. Like, you're just going to give up service if you're leaning that far. So these are the
conversations that like these are the conversations that happen on the military side. So to give you context on it, like we were talking about it about a week or so ago, and they know that I work in freight brokerage, so they're asking me like, what does this look like from your side of it, on the commercial trucking side? Now, and I explained the same thing, like, hey, I can give you ballpark what a going rate is for a flatbed. I said, but there are other things that impact that. So as you try to suck up this capacity and do it all at once, that rate is going to get driven up. I said, furthermore, you're trying to get into New York City. I said, there are plenty of drivers who will refuse to ever deliver within the 5 boroughs because they don't want to deal with...
The same reason we don't want to send drivers.
Exactly.
The same reason we don't want to send them is the same point of view some folks are going to have.
So they said, well, what are some things that we can do to kind of like outline this? So, we have these little think tanks and whatnot. And then the output of all of this is, all right, here's the deal. We want to move 50% of the equipment by this date, 75 by this date, and 100% by this date. The rest is flexible, right? So we have kind of like benchmarks. Like you said, there's that gray area there. That's exactly what we're dealing with here is, okay, we want to have the cost realistic, and we understand it's going to be within this general window, but we're also going to have requirements on when we have certain percentages. Then you have to find the balancing act. And once this, we have to put together ideas of like, okay, we have equipment that's not all in Western New York. Some of it's up in Fort Drum in the Adirondacks area. Some of it's in Western New York near Buffalo. Some of it's in the middle of the state at a maintenance facility. So the question is, do we try to consolidate it all into one area, make it easy, and try to get it awarded as some sort of a project for a motor carrier? Do we put it out for bid through everybody, all the brokers and carriers that are in there bidding on it? So we're looking at ways to, try to make it interesting and make it as cost effective as possible for us to be able to get the green light to go ahead and hire commercial and run this through SDDC. We have to show that the estimated cost to do this is worth it compared to, the limitations and the safety risks of doing it as a self move with inexperienced young soldiers that haven't driven the equipment a whole lot. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out and plays out. But those are the kinds of things that happen on the other side of these conversations. Is it's not always just, hey, this unit has to get there for training in 2 weeks, get it moved. Sometimes you have more of these like, okay, well, there's more considerations here. It's not just about the timeline, it's also about service, etc. So
that reminds me of this really funny story, and I'll never forget this just because of just how it played out. I was having a conversation with a TO, I think it was in South Carolina, and they went with like, and again, when you get to know some of them, you can understand the ones that are in situations that are like yours, and some that are kind of just like, you got to get this done and you got to get it done for this number, and that's it, right? And I remember this one move, like we bid everything out. It was going like as planned, but then like the number of trucks they needed increased unexpectedly. Like they needed like an extra 20% of the trucks for like the last couple of days. So if they needed 10 a day, all of a sudden it was 15 a day. And I was talking to the TO because this is who you're working with all day on this, making sure everything's getting loaded, getting there on time, and you're working back and forth. He's like, well, hey, like we need an extra 5 trucks a day. And I remember telling him, I was like, listen, I was like, I'm just being honest with you. Like, and when you do these a lot, you get to know the other brokers you're working with. And oftentimes we would talk with each other because we're all working for the same goal to get them moved effectively. Not every broker is just trying to undercut to just make money. Like these are long-term relationships. You care about doing them well. Also, if you have a failure, you get blocked from all SDD freight sometimes for like, I think 45 days.
It depends on the TO. I'll tell you from the inside, it's not actually that black and white. So
this is the fear from like our point of view. We have teams staffed. I think at the time we had like 15 or 20 people with the teams we ran. So like if you don't have freight for 45 days, you are paying salaries for a month and a half with no loads. Like that is a very, very big risk you're trying to avoid. Again, how practical that was. Didn't happen that often, but we'd heard it happened. And he goes,
definitely can. Yeah.
And he goes, yeah. And he's like, we need, 5 more trucks a day. And I remember telling him, I said, listen, like, can you get me an extra? And it wasn't a big number. Like I need like an extra $350 per truck. Cause I think they were coast to coast, which wasn't a huge number, but I'm like, and I told him, I'm like, we've been doing this for 6 days. We are sucking up all the capacity at whatever it was, 15 trucks a day. If you're going to try to move 30% more trucks, like we've got to bring them from an area farther away to get them there on time. Like we've got to pay these guys deadhead. It's not like we're keeping this money. We're literally going to give it to the carriers to get you what you need. They're farther away. And he was like, well, I can't do that. I'm not able to go above this budget. Like you got to move it for what you bid it for. And I said, listen, like I will be happy to hold the number, but you're telling me they all got to be moved by Tuesday. There aren't enough trucks this close to your base to get it done by Tuesday. At your rate, it will be done Thursday. He goes, well, it can't. They all got to be out by Tuesday. And I go, well, you've got 2 choices to make. Like you either get them moved by Tuesday at a higher number, or you're just going to have to wait because nobody's just going to lose and work all afternoon to get this moved because you changed the parameters. And I'll never forget how he said this to me. He said it's super serious, like almost in a movie. He goes, well, son, failure isn't an option. And I remember I paused for a minute and I was like, in all due respect, sir, I was like, failure's your most likely outcome if you don't pick which one of these. Because these aren't my opinions. These are just the economics of the situation you're in. So like, you can either look really bad to who you report to by missing your deadline, or you can find a way to get, and it wasn't just us, it was like any of the brokers you work with. I'm like, I don't even care if you give me the loads. Give them to the other broker. I think I was moving like Landstar mostly. I'm like, give him to Mario over there. I was like, but at the end of the day, like nobody's got the ability to get a driver to drive 250 miles empty for free. So somebody's got to find a way to pay these guys.
Yep. So I'll tell you, like and very similar to like, private companies and customers that are not government or military, the TO is just like any other customer. So like you mentioned, you could get blacklisted for 45 days. So like our guy in New York State, I had this conversation with him a couple years ago, and he's like, yeah, that's not how it works. He goes, we have leeway. He goes, I can pick and choose who I want to work with based on if I like them or not. He goes, I have some wiggle room on rates if I need to. I can tell someone that I can't work with them for X amount of time because they screwed up, or I can give them a pass. So it's the same way that like customers are like, they have that. They have that ability.
So glad you brought that up. That's what I wanted to circle back to, right? Which was what we learned after you do this for like a few months or years, like you realize like it's not just the lowest number. It's the lowest reasonable number compared to your track record, right? If you get them every truck they've ever asked for every time you've bid that, like, you get priority. Why? Because there's less risk for the guy doing business with you, right?
Yep.
Just like you said, when you get to know them and you get a relationship, like, they'll tell you this. They're like, look, man, I've done the last 3 movements with you guys. You have not missed a beat. Every truck's been on time. So when you go, hey, look, I need a little bit more to help you get this thing done, they're way more inclined to help you. This is also why when you start working with a new customer, your first couple loads, there's no leeway on rate. And to go back and ask for more money makes you look worse. Why? Because you haven't established a track record of trust, of service, of you doing what you say you're going to do. Once you have that, then you get a little more flexibility because they know what they're paying for. It's not, oh, this is a bait and switch. This guy told me he can move the load for $1,500, took the load, called me an hour later, told me he needs $2,200. Like, nobody wants to do business with that person if that's the way you're starting your relationship.
Absolutely. So those are kind of the basics. We got anything else on the DoD side here? That was really my whole thing is like, I guess the big takeaway here, and then I'll throw it back to you, is like, whether it's DoD or anything else, you'll see similarities, across the board with all these different situations. So there's the relationship piece of it. You have unique situations. You have repeat business versus one-offs. The ability to lose a customer because you screwed up or whatnot, and how to have that hard conversation with the customer when you can't give them everything that they're asking for. And we actually have a good Q&A for our Final Mile segment that'll come out on Tuesday where someone asks, like, how do I deal with the situation where the rate's not going to work and all that stuff. So that's the big takeaway here is you treat these situations just like any others. I would say the added layer here is that understand that when it comes to military freight, the setup process and the requirements, like we mentioned early on in the show, they are a little bit more robust and stringent than just setting up with some old produce broker out in Idaho.
Here's what I would say, and this is from some takeaways that I really learned that you can't learn unless you do it. Like, I mean, you can learn it by listening to us, but like, you're still going to probably have to do this to experience it to really understand how to do it better. And it's the first biggest learning curve was what I kept saying is like, when you move multiple trucks on the same lane every day for a certain period of time, the pricing is very different because there's not an infinite number of trucks there all day. Most people only move 1 or 2 loads on a lane a day, maybe an off day where it's 3, but they're also not doing that consecutive days with a deadline. It is very different when you're like, all this stuff's got to be moved in 10 calendar days with no failure. This is how many trucks you need every day. You lose the ability to really negotiate price and a lot of it. The carriers are going to be able to get whatever they ask for. And, rightfully so. Some of them are farther away. They need to get paid deadhead money. So like your averages do not hold up. So if you're used to pricing things based on what the DAT average is, plus or minus whatever you think, like that kind of goes out the window the more trucks you need per day, for sure. There's the correlation we always talk about between service and price. But when you've got a project with a start and a deadline that has a very bad outcome if it's not met, it really amplifies the relationship between service and price. Because normally you move 1 load a day or 2 in advance, like that's not that big of a deal. But if you bid a whole project, say you're the only broker and you're working even just with any shipper and it's 5 loads a day, everything's got to be moved in 5 days, right? You take everything that you think you pay on 1 truck, you post up a couple trucks, write a number down, multiply that by 5 times 5 days, and you go, here's what your project costs. You're going to be way off.
Yep.
Like you're just nowhere near going to be able to cover that volume in that time frame. And then you have 2 options. It either gets longer or you need more money. So like that's the biggest learning. The second biggest learning we learned from doing military freight, and I had the opportunity to move it under different organizations. So different perspectives because they had different pricing. When we moved those bids that were emailed through the SDDC, there's so many carriers and brokers bidding on it that the time it took to bid enough of them to get loads did not make sense financially. Like we were spending hours a day bidding and quoting freight to get a few loads a couple weeks from then. So really pretty quickly we started to realize we're paying extra people to invoice it, extra people to sit in this TMS system, extra people to run quotes all day. When you pay all those people, all of a sudden you realize like you need to move a lot of loads to cover those salaries. And honestly, like it wasn't that profitable for that area of the DoD. Now, other areas, like you say, where it's extreme, like hurricanes, FEMA, right? That stuff goes open checkbook. Why? Because if it doesn't get there, people die.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you can get the resources you need to do the work. And I'm not suggesting price gouging or anything like that, but like when you've got to charge what it takes to perform that work, that can be worthwhile because the repercussions of it not getting done are catastrophic. Those scenarios can be profitable and are worth the energy. And it's not a small amount of work. Like when we would support hurricanes, we would have sometimes 5 to 10 people in certain areas. Like you would work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Supply and demand is what it comes down to.
Yes.
Like you really can't even gouge because if you try to gouge, someone's going to undercut you and still have a good margin on it. So it's it's economics overall. It's just what it comes down to.
And these accounts were much more profitable when XPO had the contracts because they were cost plus, which meant like you could perform the work and you put a reasonable margin on it. They had very good service, but a much bigger budget. That was profitable to run. When they switched and then Crowley started managing it and more of it went through the SDDC in some ways, like it became less profitable. Crowley was able to manage it very well, but how Crowley was able to achieve that is Crowley built out an entire brokerage division to support the whole military contract, was able to do that in-house and prioritize smaller carriers to keep their costs down. Like they did a very effective job at keeping the service up and the cost down when they kept it all in-house. To your point of when you give it to lots of brokers, it is going to inflate rates in some ways. So like there's lots of things to consider when you think about the business side of this. Is what you're doing worth the effort that goes into it? And sometimes it is yes, and sometimes it isn't. And I mean, there's lots of things to kind of understand as you're doing this to determine like, hey, like this is great, access to lots of volume, but how much of this are we getting for the work we put in to get awarded it, right? Those are always things you want to consider as you're moving freight with anybody.
100%. Well, good discussion, good takeaways on all this stuff. Let us know what you guys think, and if you're working on any military stuff or have any questions about it, share it in the comments or send us a message. Any final thoughts, Ben?
You believe you can or believe you can't. You're right.
And until next time, go Ben. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.